Hello everyone, I am James Nishi. In recent videos, I have discussed how God has shaped the United States, with a religious and political environment centered around God, and economic reforms. This pattern of God's blessings being fulfilled, centered on America, is evident through the Great Awakening movement in America, and the Declaration of Independence, written primarily by Thomas Jefferson. Furthermore, by winning the war against Britain, the U.S. Constitution was drafted and ratified. Based on that Constitution, the first president, George Washington, the second president, John Adams, and the third president, Thomas Jefferson, established a tradition of a God-centered political environment in America. By building this tradition, they aimed to achieve the ideal of the unified kingdom of Christianity, centered on Jesus and recognizing Him as King. A group of Christians dedicated their lives to following His will. This Christian community spread throughout the entire Roman Empire, eventually leading to Christianity becoming the state religion of Rome. However, with Jesus at the center, Europe, which inherited the territories of the Roman Empire, aimed to establish not just a Christian kingdom, but a Christ-centered kingdom. This unified kingdom, with Christ as King, was aligned with Jesus' wishes, fostering a love for God and the practice of neighborly love. In this kingdom, where God brought freedom and prosperity, even enemies were forgiven, loved, and included. The ideal of a Christ-centered unified kingdom was to overcome resentment, creating a world without grudges or a desire for revenge. This kingdom would absorb all enmity and opposition through love. They aimed to achieve this ideal through the Holy Roman Empire, but it was never realized. So, they turned to Britain, aiming to establish the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Although Britain received unprecedented blessings in its history, it failed to achieve the Christian ideal. Britain repeatedly engaged in wars with France and Germany, nations that should have collaborated in realizing this Christian ideal. Consequently, the vision of a United States of Europe was never realized. Thus, the aim shifted to creating a Christ-centered kingdom through the United States. In America, a culture, customs, traditions, and atmosphere centered around God permeate every aspect of society. Reverend Moon presented a theology that significantly differed from traditional Christian thought, which sparked considerable controversy. Nevertheless, as part of a Christian revival movement, Reverend Moon conducted the Day of Hope banquets and speeches across 21 major cities from 1973 to 1974, later expanding to 32 major cities, covering all 50 states. This campaign was part of the One World Crusade, a peace crusade for the movement of one world family of humanity. The campaign's outreach team engaged with mayors and governors of various municipalities. During this lecture tour across 50 states, Reverend Moon was awarded honorary citizenship from over 700 municipalities across the United States. He was awarded the key to the city as a special honorary citizen of the Day of Hope, which meant that whenever he visited these cities, the mayors would personally welcome him, offering free accommodations and other conveniences. This key symbolized a warm welcome, and was accompanied by honorary citizenship awards. These honors were bestowed upon him by over 700 municipalities. Essentially, this created a condition in 1973 and 1974, where the entire United States welcomed Reverend Sun Myung Moon and his wife. In this way, Reverend Moon, centered on God, aimed to fulfill the purpose of the United States as a nation established by God. This purpose envisioned a country that truly loves God and its neighbors, where economic disparities are minimal, and everyone has access to basic necessities like food, clothing, and shelter. It is a nation where all people can enjoy freedom and prosperity as children of God. By overcoming adversarial relationships, everyone would respect each other as brothers and sisters, with mutual reverence, recognizing that all people are cherished children of God. What else could we call such a society but an ideal society? In such a society, crime itself would not exist. In this way, everyone would receive the blessings and grace of God. These blessings are not just for America, but should be extended to all humanity worldwide. This God-centered movement began in 1973 and 1974, and spread across the entire United States. This is part of God's plan, but throughout human history, while God has worked, Satan's opposing actions have also been present. This continuous struggle between good and evil, is the reason why human history is marked by the conflict between these two forces. The view that human history is not a history of class struggle, but a history of the struggle between good and evil is, from many perspectives, more accurate. However, due to human beings' fallen nature, they are more inclined to align with Satan than with God. This means that humans are prone to adopting perspectives on life and history that contradict God's plan. People tend to be self-centered, driven by emotions, and often act impulsively. Rather than following reason, they are often driven by anger and passion, adopting the mindset that as long as they are fine, nothing else matters. This mindset leads to a system of control through violence and coercion, resulting in oppression and exploitation throughout human history. Across all times and cultures, as God's providence neared its fulfillment, Reverend Moon came not to destroy the traditions and customs of America and Japan, but to pave the way for all humanity to achieve perfection. According to divine principles centered on the Second Advent, his mission was to realize the true purpose behind these traditions and customs. Reverend Moon and his wife have always maintained that they came not to obstruct the path of Christianity, but to fulfill the original purpose that God desires for Christianity and all religions. In response, there was concern that if the Unification Movement were allowed to continue unchecked, it could have significant consequences. To obstruct this movement, communism emerged as a counterforce. The emergence of communism within the history of God's providence signifies that communism itself serves to demonstrate the reality of God's existence. It also shows all people that the ideals communism advocates and its practices will not bring about an ideal world. Humanity, including communists themselves, will remain unhappy, and many others who are caught up in their ideology will also suffer. This is indeed a philosophy of unhappiness and a movement rooted in misfortune. By operating at its extreme under Satan's influence, such a movement that exploits fallen nature cannot eliminate or remove humanity's tendencies towards sin and evil, and it will never make humans happy. The ultimate outcome of communism is a world where no one can trust anyone else. At its core, communism promotes atheism, denying the existence of God, and materialism, viewing humans as mere physical beings. It rejects the spiritual realm and the existence of the human spirit. Communist ideology fundamentally lacks the basis to establish human rights. From atheism and materialism, the concept of human rights can never emerge. There is no basis for the belief that humans are far more valuable than animals. According to this ideology, humans are essentially the same as animals, just slightly more intelligent. There is no fundamental difference between humans and animals. According to this view, our existence is purely physical, and once the body dies, everything ends. There is no afterlife. From this perspective, no profound philosophy can emerge. This perspective only grasps what is visible on the surface, making it a very superficial ideology. Since it lacks a foundation for trust in human rights, the ultimate outcome of communism is a deep-seated distrust among people. If left unchecked, humans tend to be self-centered, willing to commit sins and wrongdoing, even at the expense of others, as long as it benefits themselves. Therefore, the ultimate outcome of atheistic and materialistic communist ideology is a surveillance society, where individuals are constantly monitored to prevent them from committing sins and wrongdoing. In a surveillance society, everyone is monitored. Those in control, the ruling class, must constantly be on guard against potential uprisings that could overthrow them. This perpetual threat of rebellion, or gekkokujo, the lower overthrowing the upper, means that they must enforce their rule through coercion and violence. To ensure that people do not rebel, the ruling class resorts to public executions as a warning, demonstrating the severe consequences of any attempt at rebellion. It's impossible to know who harbors such tendencies. Not only might opposing classes seek to overthrow the regime, but even within the ranks of Communist Party officials, some may be covertly aiming to replace the top leaders and become the new dictators. This ever-present threat creates a climate of constant suspicion and fear. It's impossible to know who might be aiming for power, but everyone is considered a potential threat. Consequently, in a communist society, mutual distrust leads to the constant phenomenon of yesterday's friend becoming today's enemy. This results in continual internal purges. Therefore, in a communist society, The fundamental trust that allows humans to coexist peacefully is completely lacking. This absence of trust undermines the very foundation of a stable and harmonious community. Therefore, in such a society, trust cannot be established, and people are filled with mistrust. This results in a society where no one can trust anyone else. This was evident in the Soviet Union under Stalin, and the same was true in the Chinese Communist Party under Mao Zedong. Power struggles often turned yesterday's friends into today's enemies, leading to the purge of even those close to the top leadership. This has been a recurring theme in the history of the Chinese Communist Party. North Korea is no exception to this pattern. Kim Il-sung executed many of his close associates, and Kim Jong-il followed suit. Kim Jong-un also continued this trend, even executing his uncle by marriage, Chang Song-taek, whom he deemed a traitor. Chang was executed so thoroughly, reportedly with a flamethrower, that not even a trace of his remains was left, effectively erasing his existence from the universe. Along with this, hundreds or even thousands of executions have been carried out, not just targeting capitalist class enemies, but also purging many high-ranking officials within the Labor Party. This has been a hallmark of Kim Jong-un's regime. Can such a regime truly bring happiness to its people? Believing that nuclear weapons are the only means to protect his regime, Kim Jong-un has prioritized nuclear development despite the severe suffering of his people. Even if it means allowing millions of citizens to starve, he continues to pursue nuclear development, illustrating his disregard for human life and well-being. By allowing his people to starve, Kim Jong-un has committed the grave crime of murder, specifically mass murder. This is not merely the crime of an individual, but represents a structural criminality inherent in the communist system. As long as this system persists, its leaders will continue to commit such atrocities. Communism stands in stark contrast to God's ideal. By observing and mimicking God's plan, communists have established a planned economy and replaced absolute loyalty to God with loyalty to a human dictator, effectively placing themselves in the position of God. In this way, despite being centered on Satan, Communist Party members exhibit absolute loyalty to their cause. When given orders or tasked with achieving the party's objectives, they are prepared to risk their lives and dedicate themselves wholeheartedly to fulfilling these goals. Reverend Moon observed that while communist members display absolute loyalty and are willing to dedicate decades of their lives to their leader and cause, true faith and commitment to God are rare. He lamented that, despite God's unwavering dedication and sacrifice for humanity, there are few believers who respond with the same level of loyalty and devotion, never betraying God under any circumstances. Since this level of devotion could not be found in ordinary religions, Reverend Moon founded the Unification Movement. This movement is comprised of individuals who exhibit absolute loyalty and dedication to God, to fulfill God's wishes. Reverend Moon established the Unification Movement to cultivate true believers, who possess unwavering loyalty and dedication, exceeding that of Communist Party members. These true believers commit themselves absolutely to God's purpose, willing to devote decades, or even their entire lives to this cause. In this way, the Communist Party sees the Unification Movement, which is central to God's providence, as something that must be destroyed. As long as the Unification Movement exists, they believe they cannot rest easy. For decades, the primary focus of the Japanese Communist Party has been to eradicate the former Unification Church and the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. The unwavering basic policy of the Japanese Communist Party for the past 30 to 40 years has been to completely eradicate this organization from Japan, leaving no trace of its existence. Seeing this, we in the Unification Movement must be ignited with passion. Our mission is to ensure that God's plan prevails and that communism is eradicated from the earth, leaving no trace of atheists and materialists. The essence of the Unification Movement is for all people to feel God's presence and, centered on God, to value humanity as God does. Therefore, we must commit ourselves, with even greater dedication than the Communist Party, to working tirelessly towards this goal. Those who are prepared to forsake their comforts and work relentlessly until this objective is achieved are the true champions of the Unification Movement. The more we investigate communism, the more it becomes clear that it is intertwined with God's plan. Studying communism is one of the most direct ways to understand what God is striving to accomplish. Thank you for your attention today.